Hey guys, it's Josh. This is going to be my video presentation for my analysis paper. I decided to do mine over seizures. I found this one interesting and I picked this topic just because I actually wanted to learn a little more on it. For me, not a lot was known about it prior to reading the chapters in the book and just digging in and doing some research. I can think back to like being in high school when I saw my first person having a seizure. We were in the cafeteria having lunch, and I knew the girl. I didn't know she suffered from epilepsy or anything like that, but she just started seizing, and obviously the main things that they show are the violent shaking, and you can't get them to respond and that type of thing. And I was just kind of wondering, what are they going to do? How do you treat that? Because she was just sitting there and everyone was around her, basically just holding her head so she wouldn't hit anything. But, so not a lot for me was known about seizures. That's why I decided to do this. But at the time I remember asking myself, what is a seizure and what causes it to happen? So when I was writing this paper, my goal was to find some information just based off the reading material on some websites and good old YouTube to help kind of better understand that and help you guys as well, and I hope it does. But for us, in our line of work, I found it interesting. It says that 65 million people globally suffer from active epilepsy, and it broke it down to like 1 in 26 people will either suffer from it or will suffer from it at some point in their life. And if you think about like the size of our class, we're probably close to that, but one of us eventually will either suffer from it or currently does. So I found that fact interesting. But for us, like I said, as paramedics, seizures are considered a non-traumatic emergency, non-traumatic neurological emergency. And for us, it's one of the most common neurological emergencies that we will be running on. So that's why, again, I wanted to do some research on it just to kind of to get more comfortable with it. And I found it interesting. I'm just kind of going back reading my paper here a little bit, but it says that there's been recent research that has demonstrated that the seizures lasting longer than 5 minutes can cause nervous system injury. So, you got to think, and, people are seizing and they don't have no care, or they don't have the medications to stop that, or to help them. They can be in serious trouble. So it's important as paramedics to know, what drugs to push and how to help that along. But like I said, most of the time when we get there, they're not going to be seizing. They're most likely going to be postictal, which is just, after the seizure, where they're kind of unaware of what's going on, kind of confused, don't really communicate too well. But for those ones that are actively seizing, it's our responsibility to kind of know what we need to do and what steps we need to take to prevent that from carrying on any longer than it needs to be. But again, just getting back to, the topic here, kind of explaining how a seizure, what a seizure is and how it happens. So like in a normal brain activity without epilepsy, we got neurons in our brains that fire at different intervals at different parts of the brain. And when it does this, different parts of the brain become activated. And then, to carry out the process, the neurons alternate when they fire to communicate the different messages. But so that's how it works in a normal person. In a seizure, these neurons that we have, they're firing simultaneously, and it causes, hyperexcitability. And that's what causes, the shaking, the twitching, and just your brain is unaware and you're unaware of what's going on. But going from that, seizures, what I read, it says seizures are generally described in two major groups. So there's generalized and focal seizures. But really just the main difference between the two is kind of where they start and what parts of the brain are involved. but the general seizures, like I said, that's just, it affects both sides of the brains for a general seizure, generalized seizure. And those include like the tonic-clonic, the absent, or atonic. Those are just a few of those that involve both sides of the brain. And obviously these all present with different, I guess, signs that you can see as you're walking up to the patient. The most common type that we're probably going to see, or that we most know about, are the tonic-clonic, which are also known as the grand mal seizures. This is going to present with like a loss of consciousness and some violent muscle contractions. And when I was doing this, I was like, what the hell is tonic-clonic? So I kind of did some research on that as well. Basically, it's just a breakdown and describes, the motor symptoms that take place. So the muscles become tense and rigid. That's the tonic phase. And then after that, it's going to be followed by rhythmical jerking motions, and that's the clonic phase. So tonic-clonic. So that's kind of a little breakdown of it. There's also, absent seizures. These are just kind of basically not really shaking or anything, but they're just kind of unaware, like they're just staring off. So it appear like they're daydreaming. You can't really, get them to respond, but that's just an absent seizure. Their brain is firing, and they're not able to process stuff, so they just kind of stare off, And then they have the myoclonic seizures. And again, you break the word down. We know myo means muscle. So, and we learned from previous that the clonic is the jerking motion. So myoclonic, the muscles are jerking and moving. So that's basically what that is. It can be brief muscle twitching, but most commonly it's just seen of like twitching and stuff with the eyelids. So I found it just interesting reading on the information on all these different types of seizures. So if the generalized seizures are like both parts of the brain, then we know that the more focal part is just one specific area. There's really, those are kind of different. I mean, there's not really much that's too interesting for me on those. Just know that they can be aware. They can, be focused and aware of everything that's going on. They just might not be able to respond. So they're awake during the episode. So some might call that like, I've read was a simple partial seizure. But on the other side of the coin, there's also a seizure where the person becomes a little confused. Their awareness may be affected in some way, not completely tonic-clonic or not just like an absent seizure, but they're kind of in the middle of those two. And those two are basically, what explains that, which is a general or a focal seizure. And then I found it interesting to read up on a little bit of the pseudo seizures, which is basically just like they consider it a hysterical seizure. Most of these come from like a psychological disorder. So it's basically sharp, bizarre movements. But I found it interesting that it can be controlled by someone like yelling, "Stop it." So that was interesting to me. These are, don't really present with any, so you can stop it. So there's really not much injury involved with these. They're usually witnessed. So I thought that was a little different, but and then I kind of got into the point of how you treat them. So we know that seizures can be treated based off of reading in our pharmacology book. Kind of how it works is you can be treated with a direct action on the sodium and calcium channel, as well as interacting with the GABA receptors. So that's basically it. I mean, like I said, we just went through that actually. So we know the main drugs in treating these are going to be our benzos, our barbiturates, the GABA analogs, and then there's other medications that can be prescribed to the patient that know that they have epilepsy. But the most common for us are going to be like the benzos, diazepam, which is Valium, lorazepam, Ativan, and midazolam, Versed. And like I said, these a lot of times when they're seizing, I know my agency will do nasal Versed. It's quite common, so they're used not only for like the anxiety relief, but just the anticonvulsant activity too. And I found it interesting when it described them as a wide range between the therapeutic and the toxic doses, so they're less likely to cause the potential for abuse. So you got that safe space in there, which I found was pretty interesting. But then, from there, like I said, it's just getting familiar with it, know what drugs your agency uses. And this is just kind of briefly hitting the stuff in my presentation. It's available to read. Or if you have any questions, like I said, I picked this topic because I didn't know much about it, and I feel like I've learned quite a bit just doing some research on it. So, but that's it. I mean, know your pathophysiology, know your pharmacology, kind of be aware of the different signs and symptoms, and like I said, just the different, signs and symptoms that the different ones will present with, whether it's a generalized seizure, focal seizure. Like I said, just that's basically it. It all depends on how good of a paramedic you want to be. You got to put in the work to know more. So if you have questions on something and you don't know about something like you think you should, then do the research. That's what I did here. And like I said, I think it's important in our job to continue to better ourselves and learn. So, if there's anything you guys want to ask me or anything I didn't hit, feel free to get a hold of me in email or on the D2L. But I hope you guys learned a little something. I know I did, and look forward to kind of watching your guys' videos as well. So take care.